Today we're going to do a lesson. I'm going to simplify this lesson a bit so it isn't too complicated. We're working with things in the composition area. The composition is going to be very simple. We're going to do one object. I'm going to teach you how to draw and watercolor a pear, a piece of fruit, pear. There's going to be more to the watercolor than just watercoloring. When it's dry, we're going to use some pastel pencils over the top to get some certain effects, and I will talk more about the materials that we need for that after we look more closely at what we're going to be drawing. This is where we're going to be drawing. I promised you a pear, and that's what this is. I actually had a beautiful model for this lesson, but it got too ripe and I had to eat it. So we are going to be using a photograph instead. But I'm going to be demonstrating here first on how you get this shape. It's kind of an interesting conical shape, big on the bottom. And I'll be sketching first. When we're ready to do the color, we will be using this photograph for the color. Since we don't have a live model is always the best if you can. But like I said, mine got too ripe too fast and I had to eat it before it was going to go bad. Let's start with this. Now, thinking in terms of basic shapes like we like to do, at least I like to start this way. I see two basic shapes in the shape of this pear. You may say, okay, there's only one, and you could actually do one basic shape. You could do a triangle if you wanted to, and then round the top off. That's permissible. But there's some work in here that you would have to do. So when I'm looking at something like this, I look beyond just the perimeter. I look at the inside as well. This has volume, obviously. It's not just a flat, if we're painting a pear, it's not going to be just a flat piece of pear. It's got volume. So when I look at this, I see up here a very large circle. Now this line's on the inside, but you know it's there. And I see a smaller circle right above it. Kind of like a snowman with two parts. So once you get those parts, you know that there's something on the outside. So you just continue down here and connect those lines like this. And you have the shape of the pear. If you're drawing on your sketch paper, you're going to go back, of course, and take these inner lines out. And that will give you the shape. I find this more accurate because, for one thing, we're using natural shapes, the circles, instead of a geometric shape, the triangle. So the triangle is setting you up for something that's geometric. You'd still have to deal with the bottom and this area and also the top. Much easier to do it this way. Now the photograph's not really good, but there is a bit of an indentation right here where this stem comes out like this. And we will be dealing with that because the color is different here around this indentation. It also has a shadow. Here's the bottom of the pear. It's a little hard to see here. I can solve that. Make this easier for you to see here in the shadow. This is a white charcoal pencil, by the way. It doesn't want to mark because I marked on it with graphite. So there's the bottom of the pear. So you can see that the shadow actually starts right over here and goes pretty much that way. So this shadow depends entirely on where your light source is, how high it is, how low it is, the intensity. Keep in mind that what's right under the piece of fruit is darker and it fuses out lighter as you get away from it because the light is hitting around it. Okay, the light is hitting here and bouncing back. Right here is right under the shadow is going to be darker. Let's get started with the real piece of watercolor paper and we will sketch this out for real. Okay, what I'm using here is, and I really love these pencils, is a Prismacolor ebony pencil. It's very soft. It's jet black. You're going to get a really black image with this. We're going to think about, okay, how big do we want this? This is a 7x9 piece of paper. What some people have problems with, and I find this all the time when I'm working with kids, is you give them a piece of paper this big and their image winds up somewhere like this. We want to fill this paper if we're going to use this size. Otherwise, I'd give you a 4x4 piece of paper to draw on. So we want to use all of the 7x9 paper. This is a pretty static composition. I'll put it so you can see it again. It's straight up and down. There's no bending, no slanting. I chose this intentionally to keep it more simplified because we're talking about the components of shape, and eventually when we get to the color, we'll be talking about volume. So I wanted to make this as easy as possible to begin with. You can do all kinds of things with composition for laying pieces of fruit down, doing overlap where you have one piece in front of another. That works good. This is really kind of static, so obviously this is a practice piece. So don't worry too much about your masterpiece yet. We need to decide how tall we want this. Okay, I'm going to not put my image down on the bottom. We need to give it some foreground here. So I want the bottom of this pear to be about right here, and the top to be roughly here. If you can, sometimes I do this, take your finger and start drawing these circles. You can actually see an after image, at least I can. Maybe it's just because I've been doing this for 50 years. Draw your circles with your finger and you kind of get an idea. Okay, the width of the bottom might be about right in here, and the top about right in here. So it looks already, I see that shape. I'm going to go in, I'm going to put this big circle in. I'm going to do it a little bit lighter because we are going to be watercoloring. And we don't want these black marks to show through our watercolor. Here's a smaller circle on the top. Our little snowman to start off, so to speak. Okay, so there we have the two parts. And remember, we take this. It's a gentle curve that connects the top and the bottom. Pears have a beautiful shape, very biomorphic shape. It's can be a little bit rounder right here, and you can always go back and make those adjustments. I'm going to lower this indentation where the stem is. The stem comes out like this. And pears have a pretty strong stem. Now I'm going to take my trusty eraser. This is something else I really like. It's an eraser that's automatic like a pencil, so you can push it out, take it back in. Again, I don't want to tear up this paper too much. We're going to be watercoloring. Watercolor is rather sensitive to that. And while I'm at this, I'm going to go over that line and knock some of that graphite off. Normally, I don't use this dark drawing pencil for this sketch because of the watercolor, but for the camera's sake, I had to. So knock a little bit of that detail off. We really don't need all that. I use a drafting sweep to get rid of the erase particles. Okay, now we have a shadow to consider too. It doesn't start right under it. Because this has volume. This is going to cast a shadow about down to here. So depending on where your light source is, let's say it's this way. Okay, we're going to go this way. And it pretty much follows the shape of the fruit. And then it kind of fades out on that side. So there's our shadow. Okay, I hope this helps to get it established. Once you get it established, you have to have a good drawing in the beginning to have a good painting. You want it to be good, so make sure that your drawing is correct and where you want it to start with, and then you can start painting. Next, I'm going to talk to you about what I'm going to use for the coloring, the watercolors. I bought these watercolors at Michael's. They're not expensive. You have a beautiful array of colors. They're not the master color box that you can use when you're a professional, but they work. And then, of course, I have the brushes, and I have two sizes here. I'll probably be using both of these. After that watercolor is dry, we're going to be going through with pastel colored pencils. These colored pencils are oil-free. They don't have oil in them. It's not an oil pastel. It's a chalk based pastel. They look like this when they're out. They're woodless. This whole thing is pastel. But it really works nice. It's still soft like a normal chalk pastel. Maybe a little bit harder than your normal pastel, but it still works beautifully on these. So we're going to be finishing up with these for detail. With that, I think I'm going to stop and do the next segment of this lesson when we're actually starting the watercolor. So I have to put something behind my drawing here to keep my mat clean. And also I'm going to do a little taping down. I'm going to roll some tape and put it on the corners on the back, stick it down, because even the heaviest watercolor, this is pretty heavy, will sometimes roll up on you when you get it pretty wet. I'm going to do that little preparation and then I'll be back to start the watercolor with you. We're going to paint the background first. So I'm going to mix some colors. This is just straight brown. I would assume that most of you have experience with watercolor. That's why you're in this class, but not everybody's the same. I'm mixing more than one color because I like to mix different color backgrounds. It takes a little bit to get this watercolor going. You know, you have to put water on them to activate the color. Brown, this is more of a true blue, primary blue here. Now I'm going to add a little turquoise over here. The color background really is just a personal choice. It doesn't look anything like the photograph. You want this to be fairly bright, so I'm working on getting pigment involved, not so much water. I'm going to start up in the upper corner with this kind of a brown color, and you see it comes out a lot lighter on the paper than it looks on the palette. In fact, I might darken that just a bit with a little black. Or gray, I'm not even sure what that is. Looks kind of a gray-green. That's okay. That works. It's hard to tell sometimes these dry pigments what they really are until you get them on something that's white so they show. Let's try this again. Yeah, that's better. And you know, watercolor, you have to work fairly rapidly. So I'm going to give it a nice coat. And the light source is coming from over here. That's the reason it's darker lower on this side. While I'm here with that color, I'm going to throw a little work on the shadow. So let's do that. Remember that this is darker under the fruit. I'm going to put this color and just drag it so we can diffuse it out so it doesn't stay dark. I'm just using plain water with this. Now I'm going to pick up some of this blue. Kind of blend it and move it around somewhat. You really don't want your edges to dry, and I've got a ceiling fan on above me and it's drying these edges really fast. Maybe that ceiling fan should go off. Careful when you paint around the edge of your pear. Sometimes you can reactivate those edges, sometimes you can't. And I'm not real crazy about that, but not much we can do when it does that. So I'm going to go back into the brown, see maybe if I can drag some of that. That works. Practice piece, see? You work and work out your problems. I'm getting rid of that line by dragging some of that brown back into it. So it's getting rid of it, and that looks much better. So I didn't want that. Okay, I'm going to go to the turquoise now. And I don't want just a division of three colors. You want to work them so they are, so they don't look like just three stripes of color, for instance. Okay, I'm using these cool colors in the background because a pear is mostly a warm colored fruit. The contrast, because they are contrasting colors, will make it more interesting. Watercolor is very weird in as much as you cannot spend a lot of time unless you're painting more opaque watercolor. You got to really get it on there. Now I'm going to take a little bit of brown and put a little bit darker foreground here, because normally, even in a landscape, the foreground is darker than the background. So it gives it a kind of a base here. But you don't want to get too far up into your shadow, or it's going to disappear. So I'm going back and forth between the blues, and there we have it. Okay, got a little bit into, oh, I see a spot that I missed. Let me do that, go fix that right here. Thank goodness it's still wet and I can kind of work that out so you don't notice that it was fixed. Okay, I'm going to change my colors now. I want this whole thing a rather light yellow because a lot of the color in the pear is going to be added with the pencils, but you can't do that until it's totally dry. So right now the pear is going to look a little strange because it's going to be one color and fairly bright, but we will work on that. Actually, that blue on the edge doesn't hurt it at all. Actually, it kind of looks kind of nice. So I'm not thinking about form here. I'm just painting this solid. The form is going to be done with the pencils. You can see that dark pencil line is really not going to cover. That's why I said probably don't use that heavy drawing pencil for your sketch, because you really can't get rid of it. Okay, the stem I'm going to make kind of a light brown, and I'm using the brown and the yellow together. I don't want this real dark because, again, some of this is going to be done with a pencil. So just to take the white away. Okay, I'm going to go dry this, and then we'll come back and work with the pencils. I wanted to talk to you again about these pencils. I bought these at Hobby Lobby. And it's Master's Touch Fine Art Studio pastel colored pencils. Now the box says $44.99. I didn't pay that. They were on sale. I think I might have got them for $25, $30. But there's 48 in here, and so you have a huge variety of colors. I really recommend Hobby Lobby for such things as that. They usually have sales. Just as a side note, I don't endorse any particular hobby store or sales or marketing in any way. It's just I'm sharing with you where I got my supplies and what I paid for them, so you have a general idea what you need, where you can get them, and how much to expect to pay. That's all. No endorsement. These pencils are, as I said, they're woodless, so the whole thing is the pastel. I use Q-tips to blend. I always keep a little scrap of paper to color test on, because you want to make sure that's the color you want, and it may not come out on this paper the way it looks in that pencil, so test everything. I'm going to take this to the side so it's out of the way of our drawing. And I'm going to start on the darker side of this. I'm going to use this brown pencil. So I've tested a little bit. You can get pretty dark with it, as dark as we're going to need to go. And you can see that you can lighten up as you go out. And this is what it looks like when it's blended in. You can see it changes the color a bit, but they blend beautifully. I'm going to start with this dark pencil on this side, and I'm going to lay it on its side. It's going to be a little tricky here. Maybe it won't work. Let's try the tip. And you're defining pretty much the edge, which you may have lost some in the painting. That's okay. What we're doing here is we're starting to build form. I'm going really light with this pencil until I'm sure. Also, if you try to avoid too much scratching with lines, they might be a little hard to get rid of. Make your filling of color consistent and smooth. Be a little darker on the bottom. So I probably won't rub that out as much, and I'm going to add another color to this as well. Right now it looks pretty basic. There's no form to it, but you will see that it is starting to take a little bit of form. These wear off. You can see the edge there where it's worn off a bit. So you might want to rotate this so you don't get a point, because I don't think you really want too much of a point when you're blending colors like this. You want to keep this consistent. I'm going to go a little bit up that side to define the edge. It's going to be a little stronger here on the bottom. And I'm going to add a little bit right in here to get this definition of this form where this pear bends in. I call it the waistline. It's a high waistline, isn't it? So there you have it. I'm going to now add a little bit of, let's see, I think I'll go with this dark green. So I'm going to add a little green to this to bring it back into the realm of the color of the actual pear. Not to worry, all of this is going to be blended out. I'm staying away from that very edge, the edge right here, because I'm going to do something else with that. I'm just putting this over the top of the brown so I can start blending it in. I'm going to take this Q-tip now and see what this does. Circular motions, keep it smooth. And when you're doing these motions, kind of keep it in the area that it is in, and then you can pull it out. So you can see how it absolutely pulls it right into the fruit, so you don't see a line there. These really work beautifully. They're not expensive, and they are really quite effective. You can really start to see that form take shape. I always tell the kids, as an artist, you're a magician. You can make things happen and appear before people's eyes that wasn't there before, just by creating something on a two-dimensional surface. That's pretty amazing. And pears they have a very subtle shape and color. I'm finishing up this blending with that particular color. So it starts to look right away almost like you could just lift that pear right off the page. This pear has some highlight. I'm going to add more color, but right now I want to put that highlight before I get too far, and this white doesn't really want to show too much on this watercolor. Okay. Next time, what you could do to save that is just leave the paper It's making a bit of a difference. I'm really putting it on there thick. Maybe when we blend it out a little bit, it'll show better. So no worries. Let's blend this a little bit, see if it's going to disappear completely. So I'm just not going to really work that too much. I don't want to lose it. Makes somewhat of a difference. Probably enough. This pear has a blush to it in places. I'm going to start by using a little bit of this orange color. And same thing, go over the top, little circular motions. I can lay it on its side when I work interior. Because a pear is more than just green. It's got a lot of color in it, actually. When you start analyzing, you start thinking about these things and realizing, wow, there is a lot of color there. And once you've done this for a bit, you make a habit of this analyzing. And you start seeing things you didn't see before. It's pretty amazing. This is also helping build a form. I wish I had the pear that I ate the other day. It had some really crimson parts to it. It was just beautiful. But too late. Okay, we're going to take the Q-tip and work on blending this. So it's a slow buildup of color. Same thing if you were using colored pencil, it would be the same thing. When I get the darker color around that highlight, it shows. Like I said, the most ideal thing, of course, is to have the real thing in front of you and not a photograph, so you can actually see what's happening there. Now, this could have a little crimson on it, so I'm going to really jump ahead here and take a risk, and let's add some of this crimson in parts of this very lightly, because it's a strong color. Very lightly, and not all over, just in parts. Sometimes you have to take a risk to gain anything, right? Let's see what this is going to do. I'm going to take a Q-tip and work some of this out. And you see it gives it kind of a rosy glow. It's really beautiful, isn't it? First thing that you're going to start noticing is when you're working on pieces like this and you get in the grocery store and you start looking at all the vegetables and fruits and analyzing the colors, and there you are standing there thinking about all these things and instead of doing your shopping. Okay, that really added something to that. Now I'm going to take a light green, this pretty light green color, and I'm going to add a little bit in spots. If you didn't start with a really, really light background, you couldn't do all of this. You have to have a light background to work over. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is they start too dark and they have nowhere to go with the value, so they kind of lose it. Okay, let's blend this out a little bit because I don't want to really lose that green. Also, little imperfections here and there. The pear is not totally perfect as far as little spots it has on it and such. Okay, now we talked about this stem up here, and we're going to actually add a little bit of bright orange, or I call this, it's more of like a burnt sienna, to the edge of this. Remember the color that we used on this originally in the paint box? It was brown and blue. Now I'm going to take, I'm assuming this is brown. I probably need to color test it to make sure. Yes, it is. Right here where this indentation is, goes down into the fruit. So we need to make that indented there, and that can be done with that brown. Right at the base of the stem, you can really get kind of dark with it. And I'm pulling it out because some of that comes out into the flesh of the pear. Now I want to make it a little bit darker, so I'm using a black very carefully. Because I want to really make that stand out. In fact, I might take that black and do a wee bit on the other side of this stem. So I'm barely touching this. You don't want to get too much. It'll look out of place. I'm going to go back down to this bottom. I'm going to take, maybe I'll try this brown first, because I'm not sure which one it's going to take. It could be the black. I think I'll put the brown and the black. So I'm going to add to this shadow that we watercolored. And most of it's going to be right under the base of that fruit. And maybe a little black right underneath it. Again, moderation. Don't put it on heavy, because if you get too much, you can't get rid of it. And you won't know what to do with it, because it's just going to take over. Nice base there. I'm going to take the Q-tip and work some of that out. Remember, this light diffuses as it gets away from the fruit. And I think I could use maybe a little more darkness here. And I don't want to use that black. Sometimes you have to make some color judgments as you're working, because I wanted to make this a little heavier. Could go out a little bit further here. But you want enough of a shadow so it shows. And that's getting better. Maybe even a little more. It's better, you can always go add more, but it sure is hard to take it off once you get it on there. So just keep that in mind. Baby steps till you're satisfied with it. This is such a light background, probably the darkness will help this. Then I'm just dragging it out. Sometimes these pears, and what I think I'm going to do here, I'm going to go back to this dark brown. I'm going to add a little bit of dark brown underneath. It needs to be darkened. So let's go here. Again, I'm staying away from that edge because I'm still going to do something with that. And I'll show you what it's going to be in just about a second here. And so this needs a little bit more of a base, more of a bottom to it. See, it's looking better already. Because we don't want our pear to look like it's floating. And maybe even the shadowed side could use a little more darkness. You see the need as you work. You kind of have to work out the steps as you go. And I think I'm going to really risk and throw a little bit of black in that. So again, I just have this pencil just laying on the paper. There's no pressure at all here. It's just whatever comes off, but I'm trying to not put pressure. So you have to control that. Okay, let's blend this out. Now you want to be careful because you don't want to get too far up into your yellow. You're just deepening the base of this, so it looks more like it's stable on the tabletop shelf or counter or wherever it's sitting. Circular motions so you don't get streaks. A little bit of that on there. I'm going to deepen this just a bit. Now I'm going to take some bright orange, as bright as I've got. I think this is the brightest orange in the box. No, it isn't. Let's go get a brighter orange. Whatever hits this fruit stops the light. The light hits this fruit, there's the shadow. That's where the light is stopped. But all of the light over here and over here is going to bounce back. That's called reflected light. And we're going to put some reflected light in here. This is where I'm going to go right on that edge that we talked about that I left. It makes your fruit kind of glow. So you have the base of the darkness of the fruit, but by putting this in there, it livens it, makes it look like it's lit up almost. Take the clean part of the swab and go and blend. I think that's pretty accurate, actually pretty much finished. What I want you to always remember to do when you're working is sign your piece. Always get credit for your work. So when you think you're finished, sign your name. I use my first initial and my last name. And I usually put the year. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you learned techniques about watercolor, and don't be afraid to experiment. You don't have to use pastel pencils. You can use colored pencils, do the same thing, but the pastels really blend beautifully, and I think you would get the effect that you're after better with the pastel, especially on something that's subtle like this. Try different things, though. You might find that you like the colored pencils better. Don't be afraid to experiment. You can also use watercolor and ink if you have colored inks, or just black ink to do some detailing depending on what it is. Take these ideas, paint, and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this.